Hi, today I wanted to do a video about polydrugging because polydrugging is something that happens to a lot of people. And when you find yourself harmed by a medication, now in this case we're talking about psych meds, benzodiazepines, antidepressants, antipsychotics. And when you find yourself in that boat, you soon realise that you have to look elsewhere. Forums, Facebook pages, to actually find information about how to get off the drugs safely. However, in the forums, there's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff is said. There's a lot of kind of ideas and opinions. No one really knows like the true way. However, one thing that is said repeatedly is that don't take another medication. Once you're in, a withdrawal, don't take another one. That seems to be kind of like a sin. And, if I hadn't taken another medication in my situation, I think I would be dead. And I think it's very different for everyone. And I'm going to explain my journey and why that was the case. Because in a lot of cases, you don't have to take another medication, and you probably shouldn't take another medication because it is going to add on more time of tapering and potentially having an adverse reaction to that medication, because you never know. That's the thing. So I wanted to show you my tapering apparatus, because I am now tapering off mirtazapine. So that is my current drug I'm tapering. I ended up on 3 drugs from a benzodiazepine withdrawal. I was put on the benzo for tinnitus, so I had broken sleep, I had anxiety around my tinnitus, and I was told that this benzodiazepine, lorazepam, was safe. I had no idea what it was, and I naively took it and trusted the doctor for 6 full months as a constant daily use at 1 milligram. So, yeah. I then was told that I could safely stop the drug. It didn't need a taper. I was so naive, as a lot of us are. I mean, we don't know, the general public don't know anything about medication. And what I have found in this instance is that actually doctors don't know much, if anything, about tapering and how to get people off medication when they start experiencing problems. So I came off the benzo and I was then fully pushed into benzo withdrawal, this awful state. I had akathisia, chronic insomnia. I had every single symptom you could possibly imagine. I just stopped sleeping completely, and I was labelled all sorts of different things. I got all the wrong help. I was crossed over to Valium in a straight switch because they were like, oh, well, maybe that's longer acting. Maybe that will help stop the withdrawal, but it didn't. It actually made me worse. I tried reinstating the lorazepam early on in the acute phase. That didn't work. They gave me antidepressants, and I ended up in a psychiatric unit, and they gave me olanzapine, sertraline, all these things in the acute phase of the benzo withdrawal, because everyone thought that I had gone mad. I knew that I hadn't gone mad, but still. Anyway, so basically, I ended up kind of frying my nervous system, and I ended up in a very, very bad place. So that's when I say, if you're in the acute phase of benzo withdrawal, I do feel like adding another medication is not wise. And I think I became so severe because more medication was added in that acute phase. And I was put through 3 psychiatric units in 6 months, and I was given loads and loads and loads of medication. So it's a tricky one, because every single story is very different, but I just want to share with you how much other medication I was given. And I had moments where I thought that my life was over. I went into this psychosis. I lost my sight at some stages. I thought my heart was going to stop. I had the most crazy feelings through my body. I felt like gravity was crushing my body. I felt the feeling of gravity. I felt the feeling of being burnt alive, like as if someone had got a lighter and they were burning my skin with fire, but all over my body. Intense pains through my body. Things out of a horror film. Like, the experience isn't even explicable. It's not even... I don't even know how to explain, because the sensations I experienced within all of that time, none of them were human or what that I knew of a human experience. It became very, very inhumane. And anyway, so 3 psychiatric units, polydrugged up to my eyeballs. First psychiatric unit, olanzapine. I was then taken off that, got out of there. Second psychiatric unit, they gave me risperidone. I was in there for 2 weeks, went up to a really high dose of risperidone. At this point, I am really on my last legs. Before I went into that second one, I'd lost a lot of weight. I was probably down to about 4 or 5 stone. I mean, I say 4, that's quite extreme, but I was really, really thin. Like, you know, that kind of, you look at the person and they're about to die. And the reason why I was taken into that second psychiatric unit is because they were like, well, first of all, they were like, we need to get into hospital, because I was pacing around with akathisia 24/7, not sleeping, you know, completely lost cause. If that had carried on, okay, so that's what I mean by if I hadn't taken another medication, I would be dead. Because I got into this second psychiatric unit at about 5 stone, and the doctors were like, her organs are going to give in if we don't get some food in her, if we don't somehow stop eating, stop drinking fluids. Everything was so painful. I was in this sort of deep psychosis. It was awful. And yeah, it was that or death. So I think it's important to explain, because this is quite an extreme case, but maybe some insights for people who are in this crisis state, because it's quite easy to happen, because we're misdiagnosed with having mental health issues. And in that acute phase, like I say, if you end up in benzo withdrawal, antidepressant withdrawal, antipsychotic withdrawal, often you get other meds thrown at you. And what I mean by acute is those first kind of couple of months, really, that you've stopped your medication and you're in crisis from the medication. It can be quite a touch and go, you know, adding medications. However, I will say that when it comes to antidepressants and antipsychotics, I do feel like it's a different ball game, because people often say reinstating quite quickly with an antidepressant or an antipsychotic, if it's really not gone well and you're like, shit, I've just tapered off this medication too fast, I'm having really, really horrendous side effects, and you feel like there's no give, you know, then I do think that a small reinstatement of an antidepressant and antipsychotic can help in those acute phases. It's more so where you're at, basically. What kind of harm are you experiencing? You know, for me, it was benzodiazepine harm and all these other things thrown into the mix, which made it so much worse. And this is what propelled me to become 5 stone, to completely lose all ability to sleep. Because I remember, obviously I was in benzo withdrawal, but what really escalated it was adding then Valium, adding then olanzapine, adding then sertraline. And I felt my nervous system literally go like that. And it escalated into this psychosis. And so I don't want to scare people, because some people are just, you're in your benzo withdrawal, for example, or you're in your antidepressant withdrawal, and it's just a straight line. You've not added anything else. It doesn't mean, you know, it's very doubtful that you're going to go into psychosis. You're going to have that kind of extreme experience that I was having and that I'm explaining. Anyway, so where was I? So the second psychiatric unit, I was given risperidone. Now, this is just like, I don't even know what planet I'm on. And the risperidone, after 2 weeks, seemed to help the psychosis part that I was experiencing. However, I was still experiencing the inhumane symptoms of the drugs themselves. And it was just, I was in eternal torture. However, a few things changed. Like in my psychosis, I had severe paranoia. I thought that the shower was going to burn me and I was going to be burnt by it literally like fire. I was sort of hallucinating. And that kind of cleared up, so there was a few elements to this risperidone that it was doing the antipsychotic part. And then I was also put on mirtazapine in that second psychiatric unit. And I think that I was sleeping. And I think that was the key, is that these drugs were making me sleep. And I did get, after those 2 weeks, I got to a better spot. And I seemed to have this kind of window. But because I was on this really heavy dose of risperidone and mirtazapine, I felt heavy, I felt sedated. I was still experiencing the extreme side effects of the drug and neurological dysfunction and just the craziest stuff going on. So my life wasn't normal, but it was more of a window of like, oh, I think I can sit down. The akathisia wasn't so bad. And anyway, so I get home and of course the nurse says, well, she can come off the risperidone now, and at that stage, I still didn't really know what was going on. I wasn't fully better. I was very confused, very delusional, very like, am I even in this reality kind of thing? Like, anyway, so I stopped the risperidone and I was crashed into another withdrawal on top of a withdrawal state. So I still had all the other stuff simmering. And then this risperidone, that drug's pretty heavy. I was on it for 2 weeks, but that was enough. When you're harmed, it's like one pill is enough, So that cascaded me into another form of hell. And I lost my control of my bowels at this stage. I couldn't speak. I was like, ugh. I'm sitting here like this right now, but honestly, it was like night and day. Like I was a feral creature. So anyway, I'm pacing my mum's akathisia's back, psychosis, all these sort of strange, horrible things going on in my body, inexplicable pain, so scared to leave the house, terrified to go outside, but terrified to be left alone, couldn't be left alone, was literally going after my mum anywhere she was. Mum, can I come? Mum, can I? Absolute madness. Like, I feel like I've got something in my teeth. It was like, anyway, it's important that I speak this because I know other people are going through it and it's madness. It's like, has anyone else experienced this? And I've actually spoken now that I'm helping people, and I've been helping people for the last couple of years through this. I've met people that have gone through this and I'm like, I thought, you think when you're going through it, like, this can't happen to any other human. This is just this form of torture. Anyway. So yeah, there I was clawing at the door, trying to get into my mum's bedroom. Mum, let me in, let me in, let me in. Just sort of madness. I've become this sort of wild, anxious creature. Anyway, so the NHS mental health team kept coming round and they were like, she's not getting better. My mum, things there. Anyway, we don't need to get into that, but it wasn't a great place for me to be. And so my mum couldn't deal with it because obviously, who could? It's a lot. However, the house is small. There was nowhere for me to be pacing anyway. It was just the wildest thing. Like there's only this tiny living room and my mum's thankfully got an art studio that she'd go in, but I'd just be pacing around this living room, like, in this horrendous state all day, every day. Anyway, so I'm not on anything at this present moment. And then they were like, you've got to go back into a third psychiatric unit. It's that, or we're going to come and get the police to get you and take you there. Because it was like, my mum just didn't want anything else to do with it. She was like, I'm done, and I think it just looked like I had gone. And I really had. Part of me felt like it had left my body. So I was terrified to go. I don't know how I managed to get there. I don't know. I just don't know. I got to this third psychiatric unit. I went in voluntarily. I was terrified with akathisia, trying to look normal, but I didn't want the police to come and get me. it was like, what do you do in that situation? What do you do? So I go in, and at this point, I'm thinking, well, I've been polydrugged up to my eyeballs. Absolutely, my brain is completely fried. I've got another risperidone withdrawal in my system now. My life is over. I mean, I thought it was over before, because also that, as I was saying initially, that the forums say, if you take more medication, then basically you're not going to heal, or it's going to take way longer to heal. And okay, but if you're like me and you just get basically in the clutches of the system, it's quite impossible not to take more medication because that's all you're given. So anyway, this video is really for those people, and that's why I'm going into the destruction that I experienced, because I'm sat here right now, and I think that shows a lot, because you can feel so harmed and like your life is over when actually you are still underneath all of this. Your soul and you're still there. All the crazy shit that's going on is your nervous system being completely dysregulated by the drugs. Whatever the drugs do, the weird warping effect, I call it the warping, nervous system warping, where actually you and your personality is still very much all there. Your baseline is there, but then you've got this warping on the top. So, because it was just, anyway, because I thought that I was gone forever. So I get into this third psychiatric unit, and they give me quetiapine. Now, at this point, I know that nothing's going to help me. And maybe if I keep taking all this medication, maybe I will just pass away. Maybe that's the way I'll go, because I could not bring myself to end my life. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was terrified. It's like you're in this place of terror, and you're like, well, I'm going to have to end things, because how else am I going to get out of this torture? There's no hope for me, And then you sort of think about it, or you're like, but then you can't, because you're so terrified. And actually, you don't want to. You never wanted to die. The whole thing is you don't actually want to die. You just want to get away from the torture of the medication and the side effects it's inflicting on you. So I can really speak to that, because that place is a crazy place to be. And it's the only thing that really kept me alive was the fact that I didn't want to die. I was like, I didn't want this to happen to me. Like, this has completely destroyed my life. This was never meant to happen. So you can be in this place where you're polydrugged, you're in such a bad spot, you're having all these thoughts, Anyway, so then they got me up to 400 milligrams of quetiapine in here, 30 milligrams of mirtazapine. So this time, something was a bit different, bearing in mind that I'm getting further and further out in my benzo withdrawal. It's probably at the 6-month mark now of stopping the benzo, and I'm basically in this psychiatric unit, hoping that one night I might just pass away in my sleep because of the amount of drugs I'm being given. Trying, I don't even know how to not get killed by the other people in there, because there's a lot of interesting characters in those places. And yeah, so the quetiapine made me really sleep. It was very different to the risperidone. I really got a sleep. Mirtazapine obviously was in there as well. That was making me sleep. So I was getting about 6 or 7 hours, and it felt like this time I was getting solid sleep. Not that that was really great, because I would just wake up and it would just carry on the eternal hell. I got out of there after 2 months, and so it was 2 full months of taking these drugs, 2 full months of getting some sleep. I get back to my mum's, and I'm literally like, how am I here again? And how am I still alive? My mum's just like, fucking hell, like, what am I going to do? No psychiatric unit knew what to do with me. They didn't know. So yeah, there I am again. And thankfully, this guy Hans, who my dad got chatting to on a sailing boat in the middle of the ocean, had got in touch because he was tapering his antidepressants, and finally kind of got the penny to drop with my dad, because at this point everyone had deserted me. And my dad just ended up having this random conversation with this guy on a sailing boat who basically said, she's gone through 3 psychiatric units. She was put on lorazepam. Oh my God, like, how is this girl still alive? Like, if she's been given all this other medication, like, how is she still here? So anyway, he knew and said to my dad, this is what's going on. It is the drug. Like, it's the worst drug out there, etc., etc. So my dad gives me, that connects us both. So when I get back to my mum's, you know, I'm kind of having this connection with Hans, like via WhatsApp, but I'm also just not in a good way. And he sort of keeps sowing the seed. He's like, I know you don't want to take it, Emma. I know you don't want to take it, but, you know, at this stage, like, you could try like a tiny bit of lorazepam. You could try and reinstate. And I'm thinking, I've tried reinstating before. Anyway, I've spoken about this in my reinstatement story, and you can go back to that and see that. But anyway, so I reinstated in the end, 0.5 lorazepam, and in half an hour I came back to life. And I was very harmed. I looked the colour of green. I wasn't a human anymore in those months, you know, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. And I was like, how am I? And it just made me realise that I was there the whole time, that these drugs, you know, they change us, but we're actually there. Without the drug, you're you. You're still there. You know, you're not eternally terrified. You're not having suicidal thoughts as you know. Anyway, so I just wanted to, for anyone coming to this particular video who has been polydrugged, I think it's important for me to explain the extent of what I went through and the harm and the amount of drugs I was given. But that reinstatement of the lorazepam 8 months out at this stage of stopping it, in that moment, seemed to bring me, well, it did. It brought me back to life. Now, it's not to say that's going to happen to you or to anyone else, but for me, it felt like a miracle moment. And from that point onwards, I have been tapering off the medications. I've got off quetiapine, I've got off the lorazepam, and I'm now tapering the mirtazapine. I'm just going to check if this has stopped. No, it's not. It's not stopped. Been talking for so long, 23 minutes. Anyway, so I wanted to just try and quickly say that quetiapine, I dry cut the quetiapine all the way down. And by dry cut, I mean I put the pill on the scales, and I basically worked out, for example, 10% of my dose, and I cut off 10% of the pill, and you basically work the maths out using the scales. There is a whole way of doing it, and I'm going to do another video for that because I think that just needs its whole separate thing. Okay, so I got down off the quetiapine doing it like that, and I cut my extended release pill, which I have explained in my quetiapine video that everyone told me not to do, but I was so harmed, I just could not bear to change anything else, which I think a lot of people will relate with. Okay, then we have, this is a bit gross now, but this was the jam jar that I used, and I carried this around for 3 years, tapering my benzo. It was long because I was polydrugged, and I decided to taper this a little bit, then I would do the quetiapine, and then I came back to this. So yeah, I decided to do it in a stair-step manner. So I never thought I'd get off the quetiapine or the lorazepam. Both of them at different stages felt impossible to taper, but I did it. So anyway, now I'm doing the mirtazapine, and what I have found, now the biggest lesson of all here, is that people would say to me, well, you know, it's harder to heal if you're on more drugs. You've got longer to taper. Yes, you've got longer to taper, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily harder to heal. My experience has been that when I removed more of the benzo and I held the quetiapine for a little bit, I then went back to the quetiapine and I was on less benzo, and there was more healing had happened, and the quetiapine was easier to taper. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Then, because I thought I could never move the mirtazapine, ever, ever. I tried tapering it on the quetiapine, and it was impossible, absolutely impossible, without having just the worst side effects you could imagine. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm never going to be able to move the mirtazapine. And it's easy to think that because you're like, well, the side effects are so bad, maybe I'm never going to get off this drug. But if you're on, like me, 3 or 2 or more, one can affect the other. And Hans, again, this great guy, gave me so much good advice. He was like, well, when you get off the quetiapine, the mirtazapine taper could then be easier. And I was thinking, I was in such disbelief about this because I was like, no, it's not, surely not. And lo and behold, I've been off quetiapine now for, I suppose it must be 3 or 4 months. And I've managed to taper 2 milligrams off my mirtazapine. I could not even move this drug, like 0.5, without having horrendous side effects. It was that close for me. And so, yeah. And I feel like the 2 milligrams I've taken off came with very mild side effects. So I could have taken more off, but as we know, when it's like this, it's like trial and error. You just slowly just see how much you can do without doing too much. Yeah, crazy. And it was just wild for me because the quetiapine, again, like when I was on the 400 milligrams, I tapered down the first few chunks, quite big chunks, because when you're on those big doses, it sort of was quite easy to come down. But when it got to about 150, I really started to feel it. And it was like, oh God, I don't think I can move this. Like the side effects were so bad. But when I got to 100 on the quetiapine, I decided to hold. I was like, right, I can't move it any longer because it was that bad. So I thought, okay, I'll hold at 100. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do my water taper on my benzo now. And so that's what I did. And the water taper of the benzo was so gradual and so much more gentle. And like I say, I went down to a certain amount, so 0.125. I went down to that from 0.5 to 0.125 on the lorazepam. And in that time, I was just holding the quetiapine. And then I went back to the quetiapine. And it was like life-changingly different. I could taper 10% of the quetiapine and I didn't even have, I had the mildest side effects, if anything. And so I think there was a little bit of I'm on less benzo, my benzo receptors have healed more. And also just leaving that hold was so healing for my body. It needed that time. Anyway, I just can't believe it because honestly, I could have given up at many moments of this and thought that my life was over. I mean, it was for a very long period of time. I mean, I felt like I'd gone into another reality and I was never going to come back. So anyway, I always end up rattling on for more than I need to, but I think there's just a lot of people in my boat, and I know that there are, because doctors will, at the moment, they don't recognize side effects from medication and they just medicate the side effects. So then you end up polydrugged. And then you'll go on the forums and you'll be like, oh my God. And you find out this whole world and this whole labyrinth of people that have been harmed by medication. And you'll get a lot of people telling you, oh, you've been polydrugged, or you shouldn't take another medication. That's not, And the thing is you don't know what's going to help you and what's not going to help you. Taking another medication could make you feel worse. It certainly made me way worse in that acute phase. But as time went on and I healed more from the benzo, it felt like, I don't know, that reinstatement working 8 months out was just bizarre. And it just felt like the benzodiazepine is works very differently in that sense, the acute phase, and the further you get out, the more you heal. And yeah, and I've sort of did a lot of research into this polydrugging stuff because you think, God, I'm on all these drugs and my life's over, like I keep saying, but it's not. And there's lots of other people that have been polydrugged, and you can get off the medication. It's just different for everyone. We're all so different. My story is going to be so different to your story. But what my story showed me is that don't believe everything you read on the internet. However, there is a lot of very useful information on there as well. And the way I got through this was just doing all my research, reading just everything on the drugs that I was on, people's different experiences, gauging, and then basically just doing a body-led tapering a little bit, seeing how I react. Okay, go from there, rather than following any sort of protocol from a doctor saying, okay, so in 6 months, I want you off this medication. So you're going to have to cut, 15 milligrams every 2 weeks or whatever. It's like, for a lot of us, and especially where I was, that would have killed me. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I'm going to do another video just on tapering and just kind of really break it down. I'm holding this little syringe because I use there's different like sort of sizes, and this was quite useful when you're doing a hyperbolic taper, when you're just taking a tiny bit of water out. Obviously this is for the water tapers. But yeah, there's all sorts of different syringe sizes, and I had a giant syringe in the end because I kept on losing them. Anyway, that's for another video. Healing does happen. And just because you're polydrugged and on more than one medication does not mean that you're not going to heal. Something else just come into my head. That, and Surviving Antidepressants has this on it. So Surviving Antidepressants is quite a good website, and it talks about how some medications are very sedative, like they're called the brakes, and some of them are called the accelerators. So some medication is actually quite more stimulating and fast rather than sedative. And when you're polydrugged, they do say that it's good to think about that and be like, right, so if I remove all the sedative drugs, all the sleepy drugs, all the brakes, and I leave all the fast accelerators, all the stimulating drugs, that could be, not necessarily, but it could leave you in a bit of a pickle, because you could maybe end up manic with insomnia, or, you know what I mean, more stimulated. Whereas we've always got to basically protect our sleep. And that's something that I really thought about whilst I was tapering these. Because the mirtazapine, whenever I tried to move that drug whilst I was on the other two, I would lose my sleep immediately. And it would take about a couple of weeks for me to get back into sleep again and like go back to my original dose and be like, okay, is this going to even out? And so I was like, well, I can't move that drug. That drug is making me sleep. So again, that was also another choice that I made because I just couldn't move it. And so if you're on a drug that's really helping you sleep and it's not giving you like horrendous side effects and it's not making, you know what I mean? Because if you're on something that's like really not making you well, you need to get off it. But if it's okay and you're tolerating it all right, but you just want to get off it, just think about, okay, well, maybe I could stay on that. That could help my sleep whilst I taper my benzo, for example. Because I do think sleep is so important. And okay, lastly, on Surviving Antidepressants, they talk about how you should taper your benzo last and do everything else first, because if you taper the benzo first, your GABA receptors are going to be really sensitive, and how the hell are you going to get off the other medication? Because you're going to have got off the benzo and be healing from that, which is interesting, but hasn't been my experience. And it was something that really, really confused me, because I was like, oh God, what do? Do I leave my benzo to the last bit? But then I was like, but I'm on 3 medications. So if I did that, I'd still be on the benzo now. And I would have had to have taken that benzo probably for 5 or 6 years whilst I tapered the other two. And for me, that just wasn't an option. I was like, one, it was really expensive. I had to get this drug privately because no other doctor would give it to me. And two, I don't want to be on a, benzo for that long. That's bad. That's really bad. If that's your story, again, needs must. There is no right or wrong in this. I have a friend of mine who is holding at 5 milligrams of Valium and cannot move it any further for the moment, and plans to remain holding there for maybe a couple of years. So, we're all different, but I'm just saying it just didn't feel like, okay, necessary. Maybe it wasn't necessary for me because I was managing to taper the benzo without horrendous side effects in that moment, with my water taper. So that's an interesting theory. And I think, again, it just goes back to how we're all different. And gauging like, okay, is the benzo really tricky to taper? Maybe I can just hold it for a bit. There's a lot of talk about tolerance, and that's also something that people can experience with benzos. So once you get into the tolerance phase, it's like you're just in a really symptomatic space, and whatever you do, even holding, will, you're not going to see much improvement. That is a tough place to be. But I've spoken to people that have got through that and they have healed, and they've had to taper through the tolerance, but they got off it. Anyway, what I'm saying is that decision of what to do first is maddening. And there is no right way and wrong way, basically. It's your way. And it's whatever whatever's easier to taper for you in that moment, whatever is saving your sleep, and it's just juggling it. But you can do it. And honestly, the more you get off, the more you heal, and actually the better you feel. All right.